It's nice to meet you on this platform. My name is Emmanuel Akindele from Obafemi Awolowo University, Ife, Nigeria. And I'm highly delighted to be speaking this afternoon on the decades of microplastic research in Africa. What are the prospects and challenges? Uh, I would like to start this presentation by first talking about the evolution of microplastics in Africa. I have some agenda which I've outlined in this PowerPoint, but because of our time, we might not be able to go through all the agenda one after the other. Now, interestingly, the term microplastic evolved or was first used in Africa, and that was by Ryan and Moloney in 1990 when they carried out a study on plastics and artifacts on a South African beach, and that was in 1990. And between 1990 and 2004, there was a break, a long break in terms of the usage of the term microplastics. I must quickly mention that before then, there have been some studies in Africa on plastics, but these were on macroplastics. You know, there's a difference between macro and microplastics. So in 2004, the term became worldwide when a study was conducted in the UK by Thompson et al. Thompson et al. That was specifically at Plymouth in the UK. And the study was also on sediments. So they analyzed sediment samples for microplastics. Afterwards, between 2004 and 2015, in other parts of the world, there are some studies conducted. But it was not until 2015 that Africa started recording some studies on microplastics effectively in Africa. And the first one was, the first two studies were conducted by Naidoo et al., and that was at KZN in South Africa, while the second one was by Nel and Fruman, also in South Africa. I must quickly mention also that these studies were all carried out in marine and estuarine environments. None was carried out in freshwater environments, and mostly also on sediments. However, the study by Nel and Fruman also considered microplastic in soft water, that is in water samples. So for the purpose of this discussion, I would like to consider the annual rate of publications on microplastic since it evolved in Africa between 2015 to 2020. So what has been the trend in this period? Like I mentioned earlier, two studies were carried out in 2015. Then in 2016, there were also another two studies carried out. Then in 2017, there was a significant increase in the number of studies from Africa. Not so much though, but it was significant because about 5 studies were carried out on microplastics in 2017. 2018, we had a total of 6 publications on microplastics. Then in 2019, we had a total of 9 publications. In 2020, I would say that was the year that marked the beginning for Africa, in the sense that the number of publications on microplastics in 2020 from Africa far exceeded the total number of publications in the previous years. So I think for these African researchers on microplastics deserve a thumbs up. Now, altogether between 2015 and 2020, a total of 54 microplastic studies were carried out, at least from literature search. And of these 54 microplastics reports, only 14 nations, this report came from 14 nations in Africa. And out of these 14 nations, 12 of them share boundary with the ocean. So that is only 2 of these nations are landlocked. And if you look at the slide being displayed here, you could see that the highest number of reports so far is from South Africa. And this is followed by Nigeria, which has 10 reports, and then Tunisia, 9 reports. So the other nations where we have reports to date, the data from those 3 nations is still very, very small compared to what we have from South Africa, especially. Now, if you look at the sub-regions of Africa, we also look at the spread of the data on microplastics in Africa. There are 5 sub-regions in Africa. We could see the spatial Africa. And then we have North and West Africa giving 14 reports each. And then we have the Eastern African region giving 6 reports. While till date, from literature, we have only 1 report from the Central Africa region. There's one pattern I also want us to really focus our attention on in this sub-regional distribution of data on microplastics in Africa. We could see that for North Africa, the studies tilt more. They are skewed towards marine environment, while for East Africa, they are skewed more towards freshwater. Same thing goes for the Southern African region. So that means we can begin to see where we have deficient data coming from these different sub-regions of Africa. I also must also mention that all the reports that we have today on microplastics in Africa, they are mostly conducted on, they are mostly reports from the aquatic environment. There is no report today from the terrestrial environment. And in the aquatic environment, we could have 3 compartments for microplastics. So we have water, sediment, and biological. So it's either we find microplastics in one of these 3 compartments. So among these 3 compartments, biological has the highest number of publications, that is ingestion of microplastics by animals, while sediment has the next, and then the least number of publications is from water samples. So among these animals, which of them have the highest number of publications so far? Understandably, fishes have the highest. I guess not only because humans will like to consume fishes, but also because they serve as focal species in aquatic environments. So the bulk of publications on ingestion of microplastics by animals is on fishes, and this is followed by mollusks and then insects. And again, if you look at identification of microplastics in Africa, and of course worldwide, is either you identify microplastics using the microscope, or you confirm the identity using FTIR, that is using doing polymer identification. So in Africa to date, Southern African region has the highest number of publications based on visual identification, while the highest number of publications based on FTIR identification is from North Africa. So what are the research gaps that we have, or what are the prospects that we have in Africa as of today? Like I mentioned earlier, out of the 54 nations in Africa, we have only data from 14 nations. So we have deficient data from Africa as far as microplastic research is concerned. And of these 14 nations, 2 of them are landlocked. Then again, it's also interesting to know that the Eastern African region, which is worldwide renowned for some of the freshwater systems that are internationally renowned, like River Congo, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, there is data, the data from the region is still insufficient to date. It's good that we have some publications on River Nile, or on Lake Victoria rather, but these important freshwater systems, there is no data from them. Then for terrestrial environment, there is no data to date from Africa, microplastics in terrestrial environment. Then also, another research gap that we have is that in Africa, most of our studies are feed-based. Most of the data emanating from Africa are feed-based. They are not really lab controlled. For instance, what proportion of microplastics that is being ingested by animals, and what proportion is being absorbed into animal tissues by the time they are ingested. And then after these microplastics are ingested or absorbed into their tissues, how physiologically fit are the animals? And since microplastics have been described as vectors for toxicants in the environment, it's important that we also start studying the ecotoxicological implications. And again, I must also talk about the challenges. What are the challenges we currently face in Africa as far as microplastic research is concerned? So I would say it's hydra-headed, but now it's good we have enough awareness, especially among scientists in Africa. People are now aware about microplastics. But then we still have this lack of political will and awareness by governments in Africa, and also governmental organizations, as well as non-governmental organizations. So as a result of that, it's affecting funding of microplastic studies. Sometimes you write proposals that you want to conduct this study, but I guess because they don't accord it so much attention as they do for other fields of research, you don't get funded for such. And of course, when there is no funding, it will affect the kind of laboratory we have. Microplastic study is such that it requires a state-of-the-art laboratory, because microplastics themselves, they can, they are ubiquitous. They are found everywhere. So the environment will be such that is conducive for such studies. We lack such labs in most of our institutions in Africa. And of course, because we don't have labs that are adequately equipped, we can't be talking about FTIR in most of our. So identified at the polymer stage, not just microscopic identification. So that is one big challenge that we have also in Africa. And again, there is lack of collaboration among scientists or among researchers of diverse backgrounds, interdisciplinary, lack of collaboration among institutions and maybe among nations as well. So all these put together make us to do kind of catch-up studies with the global north. Now in the global north, Europe and North America, there are advances in microplastic studies. So we are still reporting microplastics in water, sediment, and what have you. So it's making Africa to lag behind when we compare ourselves with what is trending or what happens in other parts of the world. And before I conclude, I just like to remind all our listeners the words of Kevin Bacon, who said, "We are being choked to death by the amount of plastic that we throw away. It's killing our streams, rivers, lakes, and oceans. It's entering into our bodies in the fish we eat." So I thank everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, and we'll have time for questions. So if you have any questions for Emmanuel, just remember to pop them into the Q&A box or the chat box, and also you can email Elvis. So this was really a great introduction to our next speaker, who's Trishan Naidoo. We've got pre-recorded, he is here joining us for the Q&A session, but just because of internet issues and things like that, we've got a pre-recording that I will now share with you. Just bear with me while I get this. Why won't it work? Okay, there you go. All right.
Marine environmental micro. I'm Trishan Naidoo. I'm a postdoc here at University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. I mainly work on marine environmental microplastic levels and microplastics ingested in fish and various experiments regarding that. I then went on to working a little bit in mangrove forests, and now I'm back with my original supervisor, and we're taking off back on some of the research we left outstanding when I was doing my PhD. So introductions aside, I said I would briefly speak about some of the analytical challenges African microplastic researchers may be faced with. And a little while back, Holly asked me to weigh in on a short research letter that she felt could help encourage the development of microplastic research in Africa. So basically, I'm just presenting some of the points made in that with the hope that it will open up some of the further discussions that we set aside for the end. Okay, so basically the paper is about collaboration and infrastructure, and that it's needed to develop an African perspective on micro and nanoplastic pollution. And Africa's contribution to plastic pollution is expected to rise if there's an increase in population growth, rapid urbanization, and a shift toward a more plastic-dominated market. And if this is the case, negative environmental impacts may be accelerated, especially if plans to flood developing countries with plastic waste are to go ahead. For example, this was stated in this article that was published in the New York Times. And plastics will obviously break down in the environment to smaller particles. And although these contribute only a small fraction by mass, probably to the total plastic pollution crisis, their overall abundance and bioavailability increases organisms. And research across the full size range of the pollution problem would be beneficial to fully understand the issue. However, there seems to be specific hurdles when investigating smaller particles in developing countries, as the availability of technology needed for accurate quantification sort of decreases as you try and look at smaller particles. As you can see, with the larger end of the spectrum of microplastics, we can manually scan the Petri dish using a stereo microscope, and chemical characterization can be done with the normal ATR and so on. But as you go smaller, you need micro FTIR and the other instruments. So studies performed outside of Africa probably differs somewhat in their sources, concentration, plastic types, and other mechanisms such as degradation rates, fouling rates, and aggregation rates. Could be due to different environmental and anthropogenic factors. So I would say that advancing research in Africa will require access to improved analytical capacity to effectively investigate this with accurate and comparable data sets. So it's regionally relevant and then will add to the global understanding. This currently appears to be difficult without external partnerships. As a result, a large proportion of African research is being published without polymer identification, with authors citing a lack of access to infrastructure such as the micro FTIR. This, however, it has become a reporting standard and is increasingly seen as a requirement for publishing, since it not only confirms visual accuracy, but it can also point towards possible pollution sources. So we can get around this by undergoing some external partnerships, like I have done with the Association of Commonwealth Universities, where we visited the University of Plymouth. So I took some juvenile fish from KwaZulu-Natal here in South Africa and basically processed them there. And we could actually investigate the polymers of the finer fibers and so forth, try and look at possible sources. Similar things have happened with CEFAS, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but the Center of Environmental Fisheries and Aquaculture Science, where they came around to Cape Town for a workshop and established a small microplastic research facility, and as part of the CLIP program. And this was great because it allowed some of the scholars after the workshop to visit this facility and have the opportunity to develop skills needed to set up these regional spaces. So they taught people more about contamination control and using and looking at some of the polymer identification and some of the equipment and so forth. At the University of Plymouth, when I was looking at my fish samples, it was actually great work there, and then we could actually they have clean rooms dedicated for microplastic research, and we can do most of our observations and stuff under laminar flows and use high-powered microscopes and micro FTIR and so forth. So you can actually have comparable results with the developing world. So potential solutions. Well, the global research labs landscape will benefit from solutions that include this perspective of regions with limited infrastructure. At the moment, collaboration between scholars working in the microplastic field across Africa appears to be minimal, which we hope to change here. The development of this network is therefore encouraged, but may require obviously some support from global agents to sequester adequate laboratories, institutions, training, and critical infrastructure, such as the CLIP program and Cephas has done. For now, it would be beneficial to all if we could collate an open access database of expertise and equipment available nationally, regionally, and across the continent, and have probably a data sharing portal. This will help to discuss innovative pathways for future research. Hopefully we can discuss more about this. Any questions? And thank you.
Thank you very much for sending that through, Trishan. And I think the two first speakers really gave a good overview of the challenges that are faced by African-led research in microplastics and plastic pollution, and also potential solutions that maybe we can discuss in the Q&A session. So next up, we're going to take a slight detour, and we're going to go introducing Lesley, who's part of the African Marine Waste Network, which is another network that has been established for a lot longer. So she'll be speaking about that.
Great. Thank you very much, Holly. I'm trying to get back to the beginning of my slideshow. There we go. Good afternoon from South Africa. I am going to be presenting an introduction to the organization I work for, the Sustainable Seas Trust. And the biggest program we have is the African Marine Waste Network. As Holly mentioned, my name is Lesley. I have a background in ichthyology, and I'm now based in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. For those of you who are not familiar with the Sustainable Seas Trust, this is just an introduction to us. We are a charitable trust, a non-profit organization, and a public benefits organization with a mandate to work in Africa. As I'm sure you're all aware, South Africa is uniquely situated on the southernmost region of the African continent, and are therefore bordered by both the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. And so we are really well positioned to work throughout Africa in both the coastal regions. And so out of that came the African Marine Waste Network, where we really try to be a network for the continental and island states of Africa. We have partners throughout Africa and further abroad, and we are trying to provide services to all of Africa and tailored to the African context. So a step back from microplastics, but plastic pollution as a whole, as I'm sure most of you are aware, it is commonly cited that 80% of ocean plastic originates on land, and it reaches the ocean through water canals such as rivers and stormwater runoff. Unfortunately, I think the photos on this slide are a common sight throughout Africa. And so, as you can see, a lot of the dumping happens around waterways. And so it's often cited that 75% of that 80% of land pollution that enters the ocean comes from uncollected or mismanaged municipal waste, which is really scary statistics. The cause of this is that Africa is the most rapidly growing population. The world is very aware of the problems that Asia faced and the pollution crisis that Asia faces. But Africa is getting less attention. However, the United Nations predicts that Asia's population has sort of started to stabilize and will actually start decreasing relatively soon, whereas Africa's population is still growing relatively quickly at 3.5% per annum. The result of this is that Africa has the fastest rate of urbanization, particularly around coastal cities. And as a result of this, many municipal structures simply cannot cope. And this results in illegal dumping. And coupled with this is the perceived lack of value of waste in Africa. I'm sure I don't have to mention what the impacts of plastic pollution and pollution as a whole have on our ecosystems, on human and environmental health, as well as on tourism, which is a huge sector to many coastal cities and countries. And then more recently, the plastic pollution crisis has had a shift in focus towards its contribution to greenhouse gases as the world sort of sits up and listens to the fact that we're facing this greenhouse crisis. It is expected that the contribution from plastics will increase from 4% in 2015 to up to 15% by 2050. And so we get different responses. So in some instances, there's been a ban or restriction on manufacturing and free distribution of plastic bags. This has all happened relatively recently, however, and unfortunately, there's a wealth of plastic that already exists in the environment. We've also seen a partial ban on some single-use plastic items and a partial ban on certain products, like microbeads. Unfortunately, this hasn't been adopted by everyone just yet, but it is a start. And then we have taxes which regulate the manufacturing and distribution of plastic items, particularly plastic bags. And relatively recently, we've moved to an extended producer responsibility model. It's really positive to see, and this is a little bit outdated, but it's really positive to see that 29 countries in Africa have already implemented some sort of regulation against plastic, either at the local or national level. And that's a really important statement too. We need to realize that plastic pollution is a transboundary problem. And so you need to work at both the local, national, and regional level. We heard from Emmanuel, he categorized Africa into the different regions. We need to realize that regions need to come together and work together, because what's produced in one country might be used in a different country and might be disposed of in yet again a different country. And so we need to work together collectively to overcome the challenges that we face with plastic pollution. And this is where it becomes a little bit tricky, because whose responsibility is it actually? Is it the consumer pays, or is it the producer pays? Do we have a top-down approach where there's a system-level change driven by policy, or do we have a bottom-up approach where policy change is driven by behavior? And do we have enough data to sufficiently and accurately say which solution would be best? All of these solutions, or whatever solution it is that is adopted, is driven by various factors such as the economics, the policy, the resources available to certain regions, the services already delivered and where services lack, and more. And so at the African Marine Waste Network, we really try and engage stakeholders across the value chain to make people realize that it's a huge challenge which requires input from every sphere to overcome. And so it's a holistic approach rather than pointing fingers at any one person. And so the African Marine Waste Network has an overall target to work towards zero plastics to the seas of Africa. We want to prevent plastic that is produced on land from entering the marine environment, where it is much harder to manage and clean up. And it starts on land at source. And so we have various tools for change, including a very active communications department, an economics and enterprise development department, an education department, and a research department. Our economics and enterprise development department aims to move from a linear plastics model to a circular one. I'm sure we're all familiar with circular plastic economy, where we change the perception of plastic as waste, but rather as a resource. And our Economics and Enterprise Development Department partners with some already existing programs, such as buyback centers and informal reclaimers, as well as engaging industry about what is being done and what could be done better and where the potential breaks in the plastic value chain is, and to identify where further opportunities exist. Our education department aims to build capacity and transfer skills relating to plastic pollution. Our education department has started to develop an education resource book. We have the African Waste Academy, which holds interactive online webinars, online mostly now during COVID. And then we have the African Youth Waste Network, as we realize that education is incredibly important and it starts with the youth. You know, the youth of Africa is our future, and we need to invest in their understanding and their knowledge and their behavior. And then we look at schools programs, teaching the teachers, and also equipping municipalities to deal equipping them with the knowledge to deal with plastic pollution. We engage with schools on various levels, conducting outings. These were all taken pre-COVID, just so everybody knows regarding social distancing. All these photos were pre-COVID. We engage with scholars and teachers alike to create a waste-wise generation. And then we realized that there is a need for an education resource booklet. Currently, there's no curriculum on plastics in the African schooling system. And we saw this need to develop this so that we could equip educators with the knowledge and the skills and the understanding to pass that on to the youth. And from this came this educational output in the form of the education resource booklet. It's not yet published. We've reached out to various professionals for input and insight into this guide, and we hope to publish it soon. So keep your eyes peeled on our social media networks and on our website for when this book is launched. It will be a phenomenal resource and open access, so available to anybody, and it will really go back right from the fundamentals, the world of plastics, and it'll move all the way through towards zero plastics to the seas of Africa and how we can achieve that. Then we have the African Youth Waste Network. We're trying to give and create a platform where the youth can have a voice, where the youth can stand up and tell us how they feel about plastic and what they're doing in their life to reduce their plastic consumption or to dispose of plastic responsibly, and where youth from across Africa can come together to share ideas about what works in the different circumstances and in the different situations, because everybody has different resources available to them. And so this is a movement that seeks to empower a generation in enthusiasm and commitment for vision to the sustainable future. We have the African Waste Academy, which has free online education resources that conduct accredited online courses, as well as webinars, which we currently have a webinar series running on Wednesday mornings, or South African time, GMT +2. And we have a young leaders and experts exchange program with Norway underway. And then we move on to our research department. Our research department is actively involved in monitoring marine waste. And as we heard, there's really a need for data so that we know what is happening in Africa and therefore what are we trying to manage. And this needs to be done in a standardized method so that the results are comparable and the baselines that we gather can be compared to data collected in 5 years' time. There needs to be a best practice on how we monitor marine waste in the African context. Our research department also undertakes remote sensing. We have a project working on ghost gear. We are currently developing a mobile app where one can log litter information from cleanups. We are working with the Litter Broom project to try and gather information and data on litter in our waterways, our fresh waterways and rivers and streams. And then we have a project looking at microplastic toxicity. As I mentioned, we've tried to work towards marine monitoring and setting a standard method. And so we published an African guide to marine litter monitoring. We did this most actively in partnership with WIOMSA. And this is tailored to the African context. It results in comparable data and guides best practice. We also have a phenomenal platform called Are You on the Map? This is a networking tool. It's interactive, and any researcher, any organization, any recycling facility, any waste management facility based in Africa can head on over to this website. And the contact details are as you can see in the image below, and you can log your point so that anybody can engage with the map to see what resources exist and who is doing what pertaining to Africa, pertaining to waste in Africa. It's informative, it's open source, and it's waste focused. As you can see in the legend, we have NPOs, we have government organizations, we have private companies who deal with waste management, we have waste centers, and we have a point that logs any research that's being done on waste. So I encourage you all to head on over and log your facilities and log the work you're doing on this interactive map so that we can build networks and we can, as Trishan mentioned, we can build networks to support one another's research because we need to do it together. This problem is too big to try and act alone. And finally, we have a project on microplastic, which aims to investigate the presence of microplastics in Algoa Bay, which is where we're located, in both marine and riverine organisms. And we're also doing a public perception survey and trying to raise awareness about the presence of microplastics and what is understood about microplastics. And then just to highlight that we have a number of upcoming and ongoing webinar series, one which is aimed to contribute to the development of action plans as called for by UNIA, and one by our African Waste Academy. And then we have an upcoming and exciting project called Operation Clean Spot, where we're going to try and take Nelson Mandela Bay or Port Elizabeth to be the first African city to achieve zero plastics to the seas. And we're going to do this by engaging various stakeholders, businesses, governments, individuals, schools, universities, and more, asking them to take ownership of an area and really clear it of litter and keep it clear of litter. And then once cleared of litter, equipping individuals to responsibly dispose of said litter, as well as upcoming CLIP educational workshops. And that is me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lesley, for that. You've definitely given us all a lot to look up after the talk. Your different webinar series, and I'm not sure if you mentioned the conference that I think was postponed, but should be coming up. So everyone check out African Marine Waste Network and the Sustainable Seas Trust. Next up, we have Chelsea. She's joining us from Canada, so she's gotten up early to give this talk, so we thank her very much, and I'll pass over to Chelsea.
Wonderful. Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the policy going on in Canada, but I also wanted to talk a bit about microplastics monitoring and application. I am an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. I'm in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I also run an outreach program called the U of T Trash Team and work quite closely with the Ocean Conservancy. And so I just wanted to start with something that we are all aware of, is that I would say that in 2015, when Jenna Jambeck and colleagues published the statistic that 8 million metric tons of plastic was going into the ocean each year globally, that the world sort of decided and agreed that that was not okay. And so although research had been going on about plastic for decades, as was described in the first presentation, this was really the time when the issue of plastic pollution seemed to hit the global stage. And there was this response from several government organizations nationally in different economies around the world. Also, industry started to make commitments for what they were going to do, as well as nonprofit organizations and academics. And we started to see, and you see this from Lesley's slides with everything that's been going on across Africa, you start to see this on every continent, different policies that are happening around the world, which is fantastic and necessary, because quite recently we did a study where we tried to understand how much will plastic pollution emissions into aquatic ecosystems increase over time if we A, continue business as usual, so the yellow line, if we B, follow all of these current commitments that have been made and recorded, at least those that are quantitative, or B, or C, if those aren't enough, how hard do we have to work in order to get below this 8 million metric ton kind of threshold that governments agreed on that we need to reduce our plastic to. And we found that if we continue business as usual, we're going to have an increase from in 2016. So this is to rivers and oceans and lakes. We said that about 20 million metric tons were going into aquatic ecosystems globally by through the model that we created, and that would go up to 36 to 90 million metric tons. And even with current commitments, it still will increase. And so the idea is we have a lot of work to do. And so it's really great to see people starting to do the work all over the world. And I think when it comes to the work that we need to do, the policy actions, as well as the research that informs the mitigation, I think the mitigation strategies sort of fall into three categories. And it's one, reducing plastic waste. So that includes the bans on certain plastic material. It includes building a circular economy. Then we need to increase waste management. This is collection of waste. And then ideally it goes into a waste management system that is sustainable and feeds a circular economy. But even if it has to go to landfill, at least it's not going out into the environment. So this is a broad reach of waste management, with the ideally planning for a circular economy. And then the third is cleanup. At the end of the day, even if we have perfect waste management, there will always be leakage of plastic through littering. And right now we know we have leakage through waste management systems that aren't quite set up yet. And so cleanup, I think, should always be on the table. And so I'll show you what Canada, what we are doing. And actually, when Lesley put up the slide showing the different policies across Africa, a lot of them are very similar. And so right now we're in the process of, there was a discussion paper that was introduced by our Minister of the Environment, making several proposals for what Canada would do. Some of them are in place and some of them are still on the table being discussed and consulted upon. So one of the ones being discussed that hasn't gone into place yet, but is supposed to as early as this year, is banning 6 different single-use plastic items across the country that are not recyclable, are replaceable, so you can use a different material or maybe it's unnecessary, and they're often found in nature. So they tried to target products that were environmentally problematic and not going to cause a big issue to ban. And then the second one is trying to build a circular economy by increasing recycling standards, or I'd say putting them in at all. We don't have any yet. And here this means to say that by 2030, 25 to 30% of all of the plastics being produced have to come from recycled material. Right now, it costs more money to buy recycled content than virgin plastic. So of course, industries are often turning to virgin plastic. The idea for this is to force the growth of recycling markets, to decrease the cost of recycled content because the market increases. And then of course, to help build a circular economy. Neither of these are in place yet. They've just been put on the table. We have an extended producer responsibility, as was mentioned earlier. The goal is to increase it. Right now in the province I live in Ontario, the industry pays for 50% of our waste management. That will shift to 100% pretty soon. And I think that that is going to be growing across the country in other provinces. And it will include waste harmonization as they expand this, meaning that in one province, the waste stream is shared and everyone can recycle the same thing and put the same thing in a compost bin if we have that. This helps make education simpler because we're not teaching each city something different. And the idea here is that if we share recycling markets, you're able to recycle more when something has to become waste and divert as much as possible away from a landfill. We're trying to increase the recycling capability in our country. Canada has a lot of oil production. It's a large part of our economy, unfortunately. We are trying, well, Canada is trying to shift some of that to advanced recycling. So we're starting to see advanced recycling capacity growing in Alberta. It's brand new. I don't know a ton about it. I just keep hearing about it in the news. So I can't answer a ton of questions on that, but trying to build our own waste management here, because we have notoriously been one of those countries that ship waste overseas. And so trying to reduce that, and partially that is through the Basel Convention, which was updated this year. We are signatory. But we also send a lot of waste down south to the United States, who is not signatory. So trying to increase our markets at home and increase our waste management at home. And then at the end of the day, as I mentioned, we still need to clean up the plastic that we allow to leak into the environment. So we have community cleanups and organizations that organize those. We do that ourselves to the DOT trash team as well. The government funds our program and other programs. But Lesley mentioned litter capture devices. So we also have funding for these across Canada, different organizations putting them in place. We've been creating standardized protocols in order to quantify and characterize the litter, which does two really great things. One is you literally divert the litter, but two, you learn something about the sources upstream by knowing what's landed in the capture device. If you're familiar with the International Coastal Cleanup, I know that across Africa, there are many groups that do contribute data every year. We are expanding the International Coastal Cleanup through Ocean Conservancy to include trash capture or litter capture devices. So if you have litter capture devices or you know of people that do, as that starts, it would be great to log that through the International Coastal Cleanup as well, so we can measure our global impact. So if that's something of interest, please send me an email. I would love to tell you more. And we'll be having workshops on that in I guess the third week in March to begin to launch that trash capture. We call it trash trapping network. Okay. But I wanted to spend the rest of my time talking about microplastics, because when you look at a lot of the policies around the world, except for the microbead, a lot of them don't focus on microplastic. And although big plastics will break down into smaller plastics, so of course waste management and banning larger plastics help, there's a lot of sources of microplastics that aren't being considered. And we know that plastic is breaking down from larger plastics in use. So we can't, even if we completely tightened up our waste management system and reduced the use of unnecessary plastic, microplastics would still be coming off of our clothing, they would still be breaking down from our tires, and they'd still be floating off of agricultural fields as the plastic sheeting breaks down. So I want to talk about 4 sources of microplastics that are not considered in these policies. Some of the research we've done, and a lot of you talked about the fact that FTIR and Raman is a barrier. I 100% agree. Even if you have access to this technology, the time that it takes in order to measure and characterize the particles is cost prohibitive to government agencies around the world. And so we've been trying to understand, if you can't do it, is there information you can pull from your studies in order to be able to inform mitigation, if that's the main goal? So that's what I want to talk about now. So we worked in 4 different watersheds across North America. In this study, we didn't sample industrial effluent, but we did study, we sampled wastewater effluent, agricultural runoff from fields, farm fields, and stormwater runoff. We sampled them from 3 different sites in each of these 4 watersheds, and then we also sampled downstream. What we learned is that while, of course, there were anthropogenic particles, which includes microplastics downstream. Now, the reason I have this anthropogenic particle per liter is because if you don't have the FTIR or the Raman there, you're not quite so sure. So we try to kind of throw that broad net. Plus, there are some anthropogenic particles that aren't microplastic that we see that maybe we don't want those in nature either. So that we see less, of course, downstream and more in these pathways where we would target for mitigation. And the thing to notice here is that in each of these 4 regions, the major pathway or the source varies. So it's really important to monitor in the different places. I can't just monitor in one province of Canada and say, this is what we should do across the country, for example. So here you can see that in the Chesapeake Bay, there's really not a huge difference between the 2 pathways. But in Lake Ontario, I'd probably focus on stormwater management and wastewater treatment plant. Whereas in Sacramento, I might focus on mitigation at the agricultural field level. Now, when we look at the different particles in our sample, we notice a pattern by different shapes and morphologies that we see within the sample. So we think the morphology of the particles can tell you something about the source. When you look at the stormwater, we tend to always see this dark colored red. These are black rubbery particles or tire dust. And when you look at the fibers, you almost always see when you look at wastewater, you almost always see primarily microfibers, which can come from washing machines, which if there's a wastewater treatment plant can go into the wastewater treatment plant, and some of them escape. And if no wastewater treatment plant, they go out into the environment. Hand washing our clothes also releases fibers, but I think it is much less than washing machines. And then in agriculture, we actually tended to see this glass signature as well as sometimes a film signature. The glass is actually, I'm blanking on the name right now. It is a mineral that is used to help with soil amendment, but it is not a microplastic. So what we think from this is that you can then use the morphologies in your samples to try to help you understand what the sources are upstream, as well as the importance of the pathways. So there's many pathways bringing microplastics into the environment. They do vary by location. So I think local monitoring is important. You don't have to go below 100 micron. You can even stop at 200 or 500 micron and learn quite a bit. And these different pathways have different microplastic signatures. So the mitigation pathways we've suggested for locally in North America that were relevant here, and of course, different mitigations are relevant in different parts of the world. But here we have a lot of storm drain infrastructure running off of a lot of a built environment with roads. And there's bioretention cells and rain gardens that are used for chemical contaminants that are in a few places. We tried to see how effective is it when the stormwater goes through these bioretention cells or rain gardens at removing microplastic. Here you just see microplastic in stormwater, but here you see it in the influent, the effluent, the influent, the effluent, and you can see that there's a marked decrease of microplastics in the effluent, and it's about 90%. So we suggest this when stormwater is a big source as one of the solutions. When it comes to wastewater treatment plants, we've tested filters on washing machines. We've asked volunteers in their homes to put them on their washing machines. We also see about a 90% decrease of microfibers from the laundry effluent. We have a project going in a small community, Perry Sound, where 200 volunteers have put them in the household. We've seen it's about 10% of what feeds a wastewater treatment plant, and we're seeing a reduction of microfibers at the wastewater treatment plant scale. So this is a solution that we're proposing here at home because we see a lot of microfibers in our system, including in our fish. And so, of course, we all have the same goals in mind. And so I'm really happy to be here and learn about what you're doing and excited to have a discussion at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. And now we're going to move on to Adiza, who's kindly joined us she's the founder of Stop Don't Drop in Nigeria. So over to you, Adiza. Okay, good. There we go. Just a reminder, questions are coming in. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A session and type down who the question is allocated to and a bit about yourself, and we'll address those near the end. I don't know if we can hear you, Adiza. You might want to unmute. We do see your screen though.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, good evening, good morning, whatever time zone you are. My name is Adiza Ujo. I'm from Nigeria, and I convene an NGO called Stewards of the Environment for Sustainable Change Initiative, also known as Stop, Don't Drop. So I've been asked to speak about the efforts, our efforts towards plastic control in Africa. And I'm truly excited to be here. We've heard a lot from the experts, the professionals about microplastics. We've seen the maps, we've seen the graphs, and I'm going to take us down to the grassroots level, which is where I work and where my NGO works, and to see the reality on ground and the gaps and what we're doing to mitigate microplastics and plastic contamination or pollution in Africa, in Nigeria, for example, which is where I am from. So just a quick introduction. Stewards of the Environment, also known as Stop, Don't Drop, is a non-profit organization based in Nigeria, Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria, and we're committed to building citizens' capacity towards waste management. We strive to empower communities with skills and knowledge about waste and to create green jobs. And also we do a lot of research to try to present this research to government, to engage with them, to find more effective legislations that solve waste management problems in Nigeria. So Stop, Don't Drop has led several campaigns on plastic and medical waste pollution, and continually implements and deploys innovative recycling ideas. So we've done a bit of collaboration with higher reputable organizations in Nigeria, like the Haribo Foundation, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the German Embassy, the Embassy of Switzerland, Australia, and Sweden as well. And we're hoping to add more to our portfolio. Now, we've heard a lot about microplastics, we've heard a lot about plastic pollution, and there's so many experts amongst us that know so much in that field, that are already working in that field. So the information I'm going to put out now is nothing new, but is important for our discussion, or what I'm about to go into in terms of what we do. So more than 8.3 million tons of plastic waste enters the ocean each year. We already know that, which is equivalent to a garbage truck dumping its content into the sea every minute of the day. You know, this according to the World Economic Forum. Now, plastic pollution is one of the greatest threats to the ocean and to the world, with skyrocketing production, low levels of recycling, and poor waste management. And one of the reasons why plastic pollution is such a problem is because, just like diamonds, plastic is forever, unless of course it is incinerated. It stays forever. It just breaks down into tiny pieces. We already know that, but just to give us a brief. Now, for those of you that don't know, in 2020, this is what Lagos looked like in June of 2020. That was after the rains. The streets were flooded, and this is what it looked like. Garbage in, garbage out. You know, you drink and you throw out, and then, you know, it's the drains are full, and everywhere is full, and once the rain starts, everything comes out. So this is what Lagos, Nigeria looked like in June of 2020. Entire neighborhoods were filled with garbage, and thousands of polyester materials, styrofoam, and drinking bottles all were littered on the streets of Lagos in 2020, not too far. Now, I'm going to bring this home by telling the story of what we do, of our projects. You probably know that the problem of plastic waste in Africa has to do with high population. And of course, a lot of people patronizing or using single-use plastics, and also the problem of non-existence of inadequate waste management facilities. And the pictures you see are actually pictures, some of them taken in Nigeria with the project we do. And I would like to quickly now go into what CESI does in terms of our project. So what you're looking at right now is Usman Dam project, which is going to break down all we talked about in terms of pollution, in terms of population growth, urbanization, and all the things that affect plastic waste in our country. So this is bringing it down to reality. So what you see in the first picture is our source of drinking water supply in Abuja. This is Usman Dam. And chances are if you turn your tap on, this is where your drinking water supply is coming from. And so in 2015, I went there to, it's a place that is so beautiful. You will enjoy it if you're in Nigeria and you went there. It's really somewhere you can really relax and distress. And I had this, what is wrong with this picture kind of moment where you just saw a beautiful, picturesque environment and then you just saw litter everywhere. And we had talked prior about doing the cleanup, but this time around I said, okay, enough of talking, we need to take action. And so put out word and we got people to join us in the cleanups. And some of the things you see in this picture, medical waste there with the syringes and the drip bags are actually things that we fished out of the water. And so in partnership with the HBS, the Henry Bull Foundation, the Green German Green Foundation in Nigeria, we carried out a research to find out what was in the water, you know, and then the problems thereof. But as we were working on this, we discovered that the problem was just beyond the cleanup. What happens that there are communities uphill that empty their rubbish into the streams and the streams come down. Now, how do these communities get there? People in search of a better life, or the national cake, as we'll call it, migrated from rural places and moved to like the urban areas in search of greener pastures. And so as they cannot afford the high life or the expense, it's pretty expensive, they go to communities where they can afford, which is within their reach. And some of these communities have rivers and streams which feed into other bigger rivers and streams and also feed into oceans. So we had a cluster of people living in the community that was not designated to be lived in, and they were also not provided with waste management facilities. So they were emptying their waste into the drinking water source because they are not recognized, of course, as a legal settlement. They're very close to quarry sites, which is not supposed to be for human habitation. And so we had waste coming from these people into our drinking water sources. And so you see the growth of population, which has led to urbanization in these areas, which has now led to waste being generated every day, which has now led to a problem of pollution of our drinking water source. And also the absence of infrastructure to take care of this waste is also a problem. And so we carried out our research and we discovered the presence of pharmaceutical and microplastic in all the water samples we collected. We discovered microplastic sediments in the sediments and the water samples as well, and also the presence of some pharmaceuticals like analgesic and antibiotics in the drinking water source. And we've been engaging with our government to try to find an answer and try to bring a possible solution to this problem. Now, apart from the research we've done, we also engage in communities in schools because we believe that education is very key. Just like Lesley has spoken about, and she spoke very extensively about educational programs they have, we need to start to educate the younger ones about waste. A number of times we see like parents just drink and throw their things out, and children mirror what their parents do, and so they take on that attitude and continue. But with this educational programs we have, we're able to speak with kids and try to get them at a younger age to begin to change their focus on what litter is and about waste and how it impacts the environment. Also, what we do, we organize strategic cleanup and sensitization programs. Well, you'll say, okay, well, cleanups don't do much, but cleanups at least take out what is already, reduce the amounts that would have ended up in the environment. And in addition to our cleanup, we also have sensitization programs. So here you see where we were cleaning the dam, which is the source of our drinking water source, and also other cleanup campaigns that we've done within the FCT. We've also gone a step further by having our Trishan show, which is like the fashion show where we get people to kind of come together to talk about the issue of plastic waste, using fashion as a vehicle, you know, and then start on the conversation about eco-friendly fashion or sustainable fashion. we just spoke right now about fiber and plastic in our environment. So these conversations arise when we have our fashion show, where we get designers to come and begin to have conversations around issues that relate to the environment and textile industry. And here are more photos from our Trishan show, which is held annually in Abuja. And we also carry out awareness programs to the general public on the negative impacts of single-use plastic. So we have campaigns where we go down to the streets and just talk to the general public about their waste generation and how it impacts the environment, and kind of just sensitize them on the negative impacts of waste in the environment. What we also do as an NGO, we do intervention programs in schools and communities where we go and try to get the message across, about the problem of littering and the impact on the environment, and wildlife and marine life and human beings as well. So we do that. And then this is one of the projects that is very dear to my heart, is our waste resource project. It's an income generating scheme that people can exchange their plastics and other streams of recyclables for food and sports gear. So I know that this is also happening in different African countries, and also I'm aware, I think maybe in Philippines or somewhere, but people are taking steps to ensure, communities are taking steps to ensure that they're doing something with their waste and getting people to think more about waste and how they can make profit out of their waste, and how they can keep the environment clean. So basically what Stop Don't Drop does with this is that we get the community, which hitherto would not clean up the environment, to now see a need to clean up the environment and bring their waste and exchange them for food items. This was also born out of the fact that a few years ago, a young boy was beaten and set ablaze because he stole food. And so we realized that in communities where people do not have food, they can exchange their waste, and they can have food. And also to encourage sports in rural communities, we have the waste for football gear, where kids can bring their waste and exchange them for football gears to play in their football clubs. We also dialogue with government and key stakeholders when we carry out our research, and we present the facts to the government to try to engage with them, because we cannot do anything without, we can try our best, but we need the involvement of government and other policymakers to be able to push the agenda of plastic waste and pollution in our environment. So this is also what we do. We engage with governments and stakeholders at different levels to try to find solutions to the problem of plastic pollution. We also have set up recycling stations in different parts of the city. We are very grateful also that we have 4 embassies that are working with closely. We have 31 pickup points, and since we started collection in 2019, we have been able to divert about 10,591 kilograms of waste, and of waste. And we have commenced since we commenced operations. Proceeds from the recyclables go into our waste resource project, which is also providing food for people who need the food, and also gear and other materials that they will need to enable them, just go through their everyday life. So this project helps. We set up these recycling stations in different parts, and we collect waste regularly to be able to encourage people to remove waste from the environment so that it doesn't end up in our oceans. And so what's the way forward? Addressing the plastic waste pollution problem in Africa will require more holistic approaches. Recycling and cleanup alone cannot solve the plastic problem. It must be dealt with at source. Big businesses must play their part in cutting out unnecessary packaging from their products and supply chains. CSOs should also push for more waste audits and government sanctions defaulting businesses. Government should also incentivize and make it easy for companies to switch to cleaner energy sources. And Africa should not be the dumping ground for plastic waste. This is where we expect assistance from the continents, from other continents shipping their waste into our borders. Nigeria has played host to tons of e-waste coming into the country, and we also know that e-waste has a lot of plastic components. So we should be looking into that to try to address those issues. So in conclusion, the concerns and the awareness about waste plastic have gained momentum around the world. Reducing plastic population, as earlier said, requires actions from all stakeholders. Government needs to raise awareness. I mean, there should be more awareness among the public, and like a national plan for environmental sound management of waste, and industries need to take on producer responsibility to minimize the negative impact of plastic pollution. And then we also need an attitudinal change towards waste management from the people. So thank you very much. My name is Adiza, and I am the convener of Stewards of the Environment. Sorry, I hope, well, forgotten across.
Thank you very much, Adiza.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to all the speakers that we've had today. We're perfectly on time, so we've got lots of time for questions. I'm just going to, if you just unshare your video, your screen, then we can link up to all of the other panelists, and we can all put on our videos. Yeah, great. So if all the panelists and PAN-microplastic conveners just share their videos, we'll open the floor up to the attendees. So there's two ways that we can do this. We've got about 9 questions in the Q&A session. They're quite lengthy and meaty questions. So I can also, I will probably let some attendees join the panelist group and ask these questions themselves. The first question that I see, the first one, which is directed to Emmanuel, is really about the facilities that are in place in Nigeria for polymer identification. Sorry about that, I just got post. Yeah, so it's basically about polymer identification in Nigeria, and I think someone has already answered this, if there are labs in place and that are they equipped with FTIR, but maybe you can also elaborate on this, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Oli. To the best of my knowledge, I do not think of any labs at the moment in Nigeria where you can do micro FTIR identification. I know possibly maybe there are labs that can do FTIR for microplastics, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of one for now.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I think someone did answer that question and indicated that there are labs with FTIR capabilities, but maybe not necessarily on the micro scale. And I think if there are these kind of capabilities, that's kind of what Trishan was talking about, is really to have a database that has the expertise, has the infrastructure available in different regions, will make it quite easy for new researchers to come and figure out where they can do their FTIR or Raman analyses. So there seems to be a question from Stanley, and questions to the conveners, serious challenges with borders funding. Okay, so he's basically saying we have serious challenges with funding. The government seems to show a lack of interest in academic research. He's from Nigeria. How can we access funds for microplastic research and collaboration? I guess this is a question to the entire panel, including ourselves, especially because one of the things that we're saying is that we need more collaboration, we need more transboundary data. So how do we actually get this funding? So I'm going to open that up to anyone who wants to answer that, because I think it is a difficult question to answer. Anyone, any takers? Maybe Lesley, I know that you don't specifically do microplastic research, but the African Marine Waste Network has gone leaps and bounds from what it started off with in 2015. So a lot of your funding is international or local funding.
Yeah, so thanks, Holly. It's a very tricky one, and obviously in Africa, I mean, the challenges are numerous and large. So it's really hard to prioritize funding, and it's, you know, especially as the world faces this COVID pandemic, funding for things like environmental sort of projects have sort of bottlenecked and dried up a little bit. There were numerous funding opportunities which we had started to explore that were recalled because the funding was diverted elsewhere. And I'm sure this isn't a unique problem. So yes, as Holly mentioned, the African Marine Waste Network started relatively recently, and we've managed to secure some really good funding from abroad. Unfortunately, you know, our government and our local researchers have so many other priorities on their hands. That's not to say that this isn't important. That's not to say that this isn't worth funding, but there is just so much out there. And so we've looked abroad. We also do rely on donations, and so we're very grateful for any revenue we receive like that. And often, you know, the donations that come in are from certain sort of organizations or businesses or individuals who have a specific requirement that they want done, for example, cleanups, or alternatively things like research. And so they play a key role in some of our projects. It's just really important to sort of not get disheartened. You know, academia is a very competitive field. It's a very competitive world. And so a lot of people are competing for the same resources. And so all I can say is keep trying. Don't eliminate international options. So explore broad horizons and try and join as many networks as possible. You know, we're really fortunate in this digital era that the world is at our fingertips, and it's not uncommon for people across the world to collaborate together. So make use of that, make use of platforms like this to introduce yourself and introduce your research, to connect with individuals and connect with the panelists afterwards and see where you can go from there. You know, don't get disheartened. I think the sort of currently quoted statistic is like 1 in every 9 funding applications is successful, if it's even as sort of low as that at the moment. So I think we all have folders and folders of applications you sent out, and only hear back from a handful, but those handful that we hear back from are really worthwhile, and it's sort of a little bit of a conundrum, because the more you have, the more you can do and the more you can put yourself out there. But just don't get disheartened and look abroad, because the world realizes that plastic pollution is a problem. The world, you know, first world countries, third world countries, the world as a whole has started to listen to this need. And so don't discredit that. And while much of it is currently focused on Asia and funding Asian projects, we are seeing a shift in that.
If I can step in for a second here, you mentioned in your talk something about a training or exchange program that you have. Is it with Netherlands, or is that something
Norway, yeah.
Is that something that's still happening, that is open to all African researchers, or is it just South African researchers?
So it was meant to be, it was envisaged to be an in-person exchange, but obviously due to COVID, we haven't been able to do that. We were meant to have some Norway researchers come to Port Elizabeth at the beginning of the year. So we've hosted the first set of sort of workshops around that. If anyone is interested in it though, please do feel free to get hold of me. My contact details were on my slide, but I'll also post it in the chat, my email address. So please feel free to get hold of me, and I will direct your query to the coordinators, and they can perhaps get back to you. Part of that exchange program though still is a webinar series that the African Waste Academy is running on Wednesdays at 11 GMT plus 2, so 9 o'clock GMT. And so feel free to try and sign up for those webinars. They are advertised on our social media pages. And if you have questions specifically related to the exchange, then please contact me and I can forward it on to the coordinators.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to another question. There's quite a long I think it's more of a statement from Sawyer. I am going to leave that for now and potentially put you into the panelist group so that you can ask that question in person. So just hold on. We will get back to that one. I've made a note. And we're going to move on to Lesley. Lesley has written something again for Emmanuel about, I don't know, Emmanuel, if you can see the Q&A session, but basically it's about research and policy and the interface between research and policy. And I think this also links quite nicely with Chelsea's work and what's happening in Canada. And I guess it also links with Adiza's work, seeing and interacting with different stakeholders. So could you talk a bit more about if you see management and policy framing and things influence with policies with the work that you're doing? I guess this is specifically in Nigeria. Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think Adiza also has some things to contribute in this regard. Well, as a researcher, I'm not a grassroots person, but as a researcher, I would say there is a disconnect presently between researchers on plastics in Nigeria and then government officials who formulate policies. Personally, I have an experience. After I did my study and I published my findings, I made available my publications, copies of my publications. I tweeted, I sent emails to government officials, ministries, agencies, hoping to get a deserved response from them. But to date, there is no response. So I did that so that at least people could be aware of what the trend is presently and then the dangers that plastic portends in our environment. But there is no deserved attention from government. So I think there's a disconnect actually between researchers and and government or policymakers. Then I'm also aware that about 2 years ago, the Nigerian House of Representatives passed a bill to ban plastic bags. But to the best of my knowledge, that bill has not transformed yet into a law. It has not been enacted by the government. So that to me shows how interested or how concerned we are in Nigeria or in Africa generally. Like somebody earlier mentioned, there are so many nations in Africa where such measures have not been introduced. So I think that alone, that's a signal. And this is just one of the many sources of plastic in our environment. It's just plastic, but we are not talking about other sources of plastics. And yet we have lagged this behind. So I think there is that disconnect. But I think in this, I would like Adiza to also, maybe she has one thing or the other to contribute.
I think that's good. Adiza, if you can add any comments there, because I'm sure that the engagement is very different for Emmanuel than it is for your work.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
I'm sorry. What was the question you asked again? Sorry, Holly.
No worries. It was more about the engagement with government and various stakeholders and how much they engage with, for example, Emmanuel's research, or if they're more engaging with the work that you do, and that's where we need to link up.
Okay, so for us, we've had very positive responses with government. It hasn't always been easy. The initial stage, there's always a lot of skepticism, and there's always a lot of like, or do they want to expose us for, what the problems are? But eventually, once you build a relationship with them and you just get them to see where the problems are. And for us, why we keep fighting this fight is because you don't want to turn on your tap and just imagine the things that run through. This is our only source of drinking water source. So it affects every single person who is drinking from the taps. So the government, we have currently all the stakeholders are interested in this project and interested to see that something is done about it. From the Ministry of Environment to the FCT administration to even the Office of the Vice President, we have people who are interested in seeing that something is done about the plastic pollution. And I think that we've been on this project since 2015 and we haven't looked back. And also with partnerships like with the HBS coming alongside us and giving us the deserved resources we needed to carry out the research and find out the presence of the pharmaceuticals and also the microplastic, we were able to engage with government at another level, which is like, okay, we're not going to sit back and just, let this happen. 2015 to 2021, we're not going to let go until we see an end to this. And so we're seeing government take action, setting up meetings, setting up committees, asking us to come in to have discussions and plan alongside them to try to find an answer to the problem. It is not always the case in all situations, but at least in our case, we're making a headway. And we hope that subsequently, as the plastic pollution problem is gaining more momentum, that more action will be taken on the part of government. They won't just sit back and just do nothing, but will actually take steps to address issues relating to this pollution problems. Yeah.
So it sounds like the researchers do have an avenue through organizations such as yourself to reach the people. I think, Fedara, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to ask a few questions from the panelists. One to Chelsea, and the other one to Ujo and Lesley. Chelsea, I just want to find out if how can PAN-microplast, how can it become part of the trash capture network that you talked about? Because the problem of plastic is a global one, and you cannot leave any continent or any country out of it now. So how can the network in Africa be part of this trash capture network? That's for you. For Ujo, and I just want to find out, you are talking about educational materials on plastics. Are you working with any tertiary institution in Africa to bring up these educational materials? Because they are the best channel to get it across to any level of higher education or any primary or secondary education. So are you working with any institution at present to draw out these educational materials on plastic? Yeah, thank you.
I can answer the trash trapping network question, and thank you for that question, because we're kind of rolling this out in March, and our goal is to get as broad of a reach globally as we can. So basically anyone who's considering litter trapping, whether it's through machines like trash wheels or sea bins or things that go in the gutter or nets that are kind of at the end of a culvert as the storm drain comes out, all of that can be considered. We're also working in Vietnam with it sits in a river, but it doesn't obstruct the whole river like the trash wheel in Baltimore. And so the idea is that we help create standardized protocols that people can use across the world. But of course, somebody might bring forth their own protocol, and that's totally fine. But the idea is that you join the network. Within it, there's a Facebook group as well as workshops, so people can talk together across the world and get advice, and also communicate kind of the issues that they may be having. And then most importantly, logging the data through the International Coastal Cleanup. So the idea is that you would use the application, the CleanSwell app, to log data. And ideally, then we would be logging it all over the world. That database actually helps synthesize and curate data for you. So if you go onto the database, you can draw a square around your region of interest, and your data comes down, and you can use that information for your own communication, outreach, and education. But we would be really excited also to come to visit when COVID allows that and the world calms down a little bit, and actually help make sure that the protocols that we're using work and fit in places around the world. Everyone has different plants that come down their system, different algae, seaweed, and different types of capture devices. And we want to make sure the protocols actually kind of translate across the different types of traps. So to the best that we can come and work with you to create a protocol that makes sense with the trap that you're using, we're also quite happy to do that. And I can send more information. Actually, I can put information in the chat right now.
So there's quite a lot of questions, and they're quite lengthy. So I hope I do apologize if I am not relaying these as well as I should. There seems to be two questions that talk about degradation, eco-friendly plastics, this bioplastics, this conversation that, you know, have there been any studies? Is this a possibility? Maybe I'll open that to the entire panel again, who's interested in speaking about these alternatives. And are these being promoted in Africa, these biodegradable plastics and things like that? So maybe this is a conversation for anyone who is willing to answer. I will speak on behalf of myself as well. I find it, as a person who works on microplastics and plastic pollution, I find it extremely difficult to tell what a plastic is and what's not a plastic, let alone a degradable plastic and a non-degradable plastic, and where its sources are coming from and things like that. We've started working ourselves on different techniques to actually get to the chemical fingerprint of the plastics and give us more information than just a polyethylene, but actually what are the additives, what are the monomers down to that level. And I know Elvis does a lot of that work. So from my side, I would find it extremely difficult to tell the difference. I don't think their use should be as well promoted. As a lot of people have mentioned, waste management is very difficult as a whole, so let alone introducing a completely different type of polymer. But maybe the other panelists would like to say something.
Yeah, Heidi, I think that from my engagement with people in the plastic industry and in waste management, it is very difficult to tell the difference, you know, from the eye, and so often there's a perception that you're doing an environmentally friendly action because you're refusing plastic and you're using a biodegradable plastic. But in what conditions is that plastic biodegradable? You know, and would a normal landfill or your regular compost patch, would that suffice to degrade that plastic? Because the perception is that, you know, it's here today and gone tomorrow because it's biodegradable, but that's not necessarily correct. And often it actually, it contaminates the waste stream, at least locally in South Africa, and industries and people that I've spoken to. It actually contaminates the waste stream and makes it really difficult because it is confused with other plastics, and so it ends up in the recycling and it's not actually recyclable.
So we'll go on to another question, and these questions are coming in. I'm struggling to keep up with them, so again, I do apologize. And I thought that maybe we've spoken a lot about different measures, preventative measures, how research can engage with government and maybe facilitate NGOs to get the message across. Some more technical types of questions come through about suitable methods for identifying waste sources, more specifically plastic on terrestrial environments. So I think this is quite an interesting topic to have, is where do we actually sample and how do we target? Different plastics move differently through the water environment, fibers move differently to fragments. So setting up these type of monitorings in terrestrial spaces and aquatic spaces is going to be very difficult. So maybe I can open this up to Trishan and Chelsea and Emmanuel. And cool.
I'd be happy to try to answer this one. We think a lot about this in terms of how we can sample and where to understand sources, because ultimately the goal is to prevent them from entering the environment in the first place. I think when it comes to big litter, so I think along the riversides or on beaches, depending on where you are, if you're inland or on the coast, just putting out, large transects and just having people go out and quantify and characterize the types of materials that you see. So not necessarily FTIR and ramen, but like, is it textile scraps? Do you see a bunch of single-use plastic items? Do you see plastic pre-production pellets from industry? Those types of, is it fishing nets, right? Those types of things kind of give you an idea of kind of where to work on for mitigation. An example here, we see a lot of pre-production plastic pellets. So we've been trying to work with industry to trap these pellets at the actual point of production so that they're not ending up in our Great Lakes here. And then when it comes to microplastic, as I was saying, I do think the shape and the color alone can actually give you a lot of clues as to the different sources. And then the policies can be the policies you're suggesting can be tailored to what you're finding in the environment. And the litter trapping is a great way to do this because they trap microplastic and macroplastic.
And Trishan, your work in South Africa, is it quite difficult to identify sources, and how do you go about choosing your sites and things like that? I don't know if you can hear us. Well, while we wait for your comment on that, I have hopefully done this right, but Donald had quite a few questions in the Q&A session, so I have tried to bring him on as a panelist. So Donald, I don't know if you would like to speak and actually just summarize the questions that you had in the Q&A session. You should be allowed to speak at this moment, so hopefully that works. Thank you for joining us, Donald.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I actually wasn't expecting to.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I wasn't expecting. Yeah, I wasn't expecting this, but it's been a very beautiful discussion and a learning experience for everyone. So I think my questions would be around how do we build narratives around how do we build local narratives that will encourage each country to adapt more indigenous approach towards cutting back on plastics. How do we get central banks in various countries to use monetary and fiscal measures to, either support or, cut back the use of single-use plastic? What should be the role of central bank? Do we have instances where central banks of countries are playing more active roles? And I think the last would be around, I know the EU has, since 2018, been putting a lot of efforts towards setting out a strategy for plastic waste and circular economy. I wanted to get more insight as to, do we have the right framework in place to make this work? And how can we get more countries to sign up into such strategies and policies, And yeah, so I think I should just leave it there.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. Definitely put you on the spot, but that was great. So your two questions are obviously around circular economy in the EU, and we don't have anyone that specifically is in the EU at the moment who could answer this, but maybe Chelsea or Lesley or Emmanuel, knowing what's happening in your country about circular economy, could answer that. And then also the second question, I guess, would go to Adiza. Again, just looking at these innovative ways of solving the plastic pollution problem. And I think before we go on to the panelists, that's something that I think the African Marine Waste Network, as well as our network, is really wanting to do, is to get everyone in a room or a virtual room to discuss how we can actually showcase the innovative ways that African-led research and community is going above and beyond that may be different to the European or other countries. So over to the panelists. Adiza, I don't know if you want to say anything about how you saw these innovative ways of actually tackling and educating and creating awareness for plastic, because you showed, I mean, the fashion show is to me really innovative, and I don't think we definitely don't have something like that in South Africa.
Okay, so the plastic problem in Africa is something that, like we have talked about, being swallowed by plastic, is something that we've kind of like overlooked for a long time. And now that the situation is right in our faces, everybody's like trying to find out, what to do to address the problems. So our decision to start at the grassroots level is because a lot of times we have a litter problem in the country where people just drink or eat and throw things on the ground. And one of the problems we have is with this plastic water sachet. We call them pure water sachet in Nigeria. So a lot of people drink and then it ends up in our drains. It ends up blocking our drainages. And you saw Lagos, the picture from Lagos only last year, all that came out, more than 50% of what came out from that from the flooding was plastic, whether it's styrofoam, PET, LDPM, low density polyethylene, all of that was mostly plastic. So looking for constantly, and there's so many people in Nigeria, and I know around in Kenya, who are doing things innovative, coming up with innovative ideas to tackle the plastic pollution. At the local level, people are, I mean, the message of plastic pollution has hit everyone, that everybody's taking steps to try to do some, not everybody, but a number of people, CSOs, are working to address the issues of plastic pollution. So coming up with, we constantly look for creative ways to address these issues of plastic pollution, whatever would make people's attention to be fixed on the problem that plastic is a nuisance, especially single-use plastic, and we need to collectively do something about it, is what we push for in terms of programs, educational programs. And we try to make it as fun as possible, because once you start talking about carbon capture, you start talking about climate change, all these big words, a lot of people cannot relate to it. So you have to bring it to their level in such a way that they can now relate to it and take whatever steps they can, baby steps, to try to address these issues. So that's why we do a lot of fun and creative and innovate. We come up with a lot of rural or activities that are tailored towards the minds of the people as much as possible, to begin to understand the problems and in their own little space identify what they can do to address these issues.
Great, thank you. Regarding the circular economy question, I don't know, Lesley or Chelsea, if you can answer anything about that on how far is South Africa? I know this is quite a difficult question, but how far is South Africa to getting to a circular economy? I know we can't speak about the EU, but maybe we could speak about South Africa and Canada.
So I think we are realistically a little way off. The good news is, though, that people are starting to realize that the current waste situation is not sustainable. That waste is actually a problem, and more and more people are starting to realize that there's value in waste. And so there's an incredible organization in Africa called the African Reclaimers Organization, or ARROW. I touched briefly on them on their web in my talk, and I'll pop a link to their website in the chat. And these are people that go around primarily at the moment in Gauteng and reclaim from people who don't separate at source. One of the biggest challenges we're finding is that obviously it's a value chain, and currently in South Africa at least, there are a lot of steps in the value chain that don't necessarily add value, and that becomes quite difficult. And for the circular economy to work, the value chain can't have any breaks in it, and there needs to be a demand for it. And one of the biggest things we're finding with the current low oil price is that virgin material is cheaper than recycled material, and Chelsea touched on that. And that's obviously a huge challenge to overcome. And if there's no demand for recyclable material, then the reclaimers, the people who separate at source, the recycling centers themselves, there's no real incentive to work, because there just isn't that demand. So we have some way to go, but the really positive news is that people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that there is a circular economy and that it's not linear. And so the thought process is starting to be harnessed.
The other thing I would add, because I think, Donald, when you started your question, you talked about the global plastic industry, and the United Nations Environment has been hosting meetings on plastic pollution, and there's talk of an international agreement. These meetings have been in Nairobi, but they've been online since COVID started. But, you know, when I was there was certainly a lot of, there's a lot of pressure being put on industry for change. And there's a lot of countries that seem to be agreeing to the need for an international agreement. And one of the things that can be put in there is to de-incentivize. If you de-incentivize fossil fuels, the cost of virgin plastic will go up. If we incentivize post-consumer recycled content, the cost of that will go down. I think we also need a global fund that can help fund different places around the world to be able to work on the issue, because the reality is we don't all have equal resources in order to work on this, and the plastic economy isn't equal around the world. And so right now, if we had a plastic tax, it wouldn't be equal across countries. So I'm really hoping to see some of these changes at the United Nations level, so that we can all work together, as well as shift the industry and the economy in order to enable that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Donald, for those questions. So we do only have 5 minutes left, and we still have questions and things like that. But I do want to just let all the delegates know that we will be writing a report with all the questions and try to answer them after this this webinar. We've also recorded this, so we will speak to the panelists and make sure that they're comfortable with sharing this at a later stage. So we will be sharing this with everyone. So just to wrap up, I've got a few slides just to say that we really thank you for joining us today. This is our first webinar, and we're really excited to develop the network and basically provide the content that you're looking for. So we really are looking for suggestions on what you want us to provide in 2021. So as you can see, there's 4 of us at the moment. And if you have any questions, Elvis is receiving emails and commenting, and we'll send messages back. We also do have a recently launched website, so please check out the website. There's a section where you can actually join the network. There's a section where you can ask us questions, and hopefully we will build. This website was only launched at the beginning of the year, so it is still very new. We also have quite an active Twitter page, thanks to Athena, as well as a Facebook page. So check out our Twitter page and Facebook page. We're really here to showcase the work that's being done in Africa, but as well as the collaborations that are being done abroad. So if you have research that you want us to showcase, please let us know, because this is the platform for that. Also, we are looking for suggestions on future events. There's a Nearpod collaboration board. You basically just log on to Nearpod, and using the code that you see on the screen, you can tell us what kind of activities you are looking for. For example, so if we just go to the next slide, for example, these webinars are typically 100 participants, but there is not that much interaction. As you can see, we had a lot of questions and we couldn't get through all of them. We are looking to do more knowledge exchange workshops, and that's really where I think the platform is going to thrive, and have these discussions in smaller groups where everyone's faces are showing and everyone has a say. We are looking to have our first knowledge exchange workshop in the next few months. So please let us know what kind of topics you want us to talk about. Is it reporting standards? Do you want to have a whole topic about nature-based solutions? Or do you think actually the microplastic is a bit of a hype and we need to talk about large plastics a bit more? So let's have these conversations with an African perspective, so that we can have a voice on the global stage. So really, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to the PAN-microplastic team and my colleagues, Fedara and Athena and Elvis. They've done a lot of work in the background, so I'm just the one that talks all the time. And thank you for the panelists for joining. I know it takes a lot of time to set these things up and take 2 hours of your day to hear and have this conversation. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you everyone, and have a good day.
Bye, well done.
Well done, well done. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much,
Holly.
Chelsea. We really
Thank you so
appreciate your
much.
time.
No, thanks for
We know you
inviting
have to
me.
wake up very early to attend this. Thanks for your effort.
No
Really
problem.
appreciate
I
it.
came with coffee.
Yeah.
No, it was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, and great job. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Adiza, thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.